Marvel Studios' Eternals has released in theaters this weekend, and surprisingly enough, it's turned out to be one of Marvel's most divisive movies yet. And the reviews for this movie leading up to its release were all over the place. There was so much information thrown out before the release with all this controversy that I had no idea what to expect. And I went in with pure curiosity to see how this would turn out. And I'll get to that in a second. But I think it's relevant to at first address the controversy going on right now. Basically, Eternals is like a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes now, which is crazy. It's by far the lowest rated MCU movie, and that's kind of unprecedented. And a movie like Eternals, where you have a director like Chloe Zhao, that was crazy, and that got a lot of people talking about the movie. And then it sounded like they were scrapping plans for sequels with the negative reviews. It was getting banned in other countries the day of release for some content in the movie those countries don't agree with, but I don't really need to talk about that. And when I went into this movie, when I already wasn't interested in the central characters, and then I heard nothing but negative reviews, I have never been this unexcited for a Marvel movie. And then 2.5 hours later, I walked out of the theater and decided it was my favorite Marvel movie of the year. I actually really liked this movie. And that's because my expectations were so hammered down that I thought it was going to be total dog shit. And it wasn't at all. First of all, this does not feel like a Marvel movie. I've heard that like so many times the past year where you hear WandaVision, it's nothing like the MCU has done before. And I'm sick of it. But this is actually legitimately does not feel like a Marvel project. There's very little tie-ins and references. There aren't a lot of throwaway cameo characters. And what's more important, it doesn't have the same aesthetic and flaws that a lot of the other Marvel movies do. My biggest criticism of the modern MCU is that they throw jokes at the audience so often because they don't think that we are intelligent enough to just pay attention, and they think they have to throw jokes in every 5 seconds. And this movie doesn't do that. It recognizes that it has a much more mature target age range, so you don't have a ton of action and a ton of jokes, and it's great. There are comedic moments, and it wasn't like a super funny movie, but it was not as cringy as Aquafina and Shang-Chi, which like I did not like her presence at all. And that's what was like my thing with Shang-Chi. They're like, as much as they are going in different directions with that movie, they still have all these same problems, like an over reliance on CGI and comedy. And Eternals actually does something different. It looks a lot different from the other movies, which is a good thing. It's easily the best looking movie in terms of direction, cinematography, color palette. All of it is just beautiful. And as well, it balanced an ensemble cast of more than 10 characters very well. Obviously, not everybody is developed to a huge extent, but everybody at least has a base level personality, worldview, and perception of humans and Earth, and conflict with the people around them, at least established a little bit. And there were characters I liked more than others, but there wasn't really anybody I outright hated. All of them had their own little skills and talents and interesting aspects to them, some more than others, but I did end up liking most of the characters, and the acting was on point throughout the whole thing. A couple standout characters I think worth addressing. Icarus, best part of the movie. Richard Madden is fantastic. I'm gonna get into spoilers in a second here. When he turns out to be a villainous presence, I was very surprised, but it worked for me. It was such an interesting twist that while the conclusion and conflict could have been more dormant, they actually made a very interesting character conflict with that character. And he wasn't a villain where you're like, oh, I agree with what he's doing. I think that all the Earth should be destroyed and all the humans should be killed for Erisham the Judge. No, because I'm a human on Earth and that wouldn't make sense, right? But I can recognize his conviction to how he believes he's right, and I can also recognize his inner conflict, which was so compelling. And it doesn't like flip his whole character, the essence of what he is. He still loves Cersei very much, but he more strongly believes in his purpose. And when he ends up like sacrificing himself, not exactly, but flying into the sun, not only beautifully shot, but such a great and interesting conclusion to his character, and like a payoff for what was established earlier. Uh, Otherwise, I did like Gilgamesh a lot. He was just like a pretty friendly, strong presence. Wish he had been in the movie a little more. And Droig, I thought they only touched on what made him interesting a little bit, but still very nice with what they did, what they established about him, how his powers affect him, how he perceives Earth. Very interesting stuff. This movie is one of the longest of the MCU, and it works fine. The There are some problems with pacing, which I'll probably talk about in the negatives, but like it works. It has a clear, defined 3 acts, and the characters are introduced. Maybe not in the best way. I'll get to that in a second. But they are all established. You get to see them team up together. You get to learn more about the plot. There's lots of twists and turns. Then you get to the 3rd act, and now I did really like the 3rd act. It had very clearly defined stakes. Everybody had some personal tie to it, which made it very compelling. And it wasn't just action. That's like why I didn't like Shang-Chi. Because like it was well choreographed, but I just didn't care about the characters. And I did here very much because they were established well, and they actually had like a more of a personal connection to what was going on. And also very good action. Not only does the movie look good, but the action is very well shot. And the like seeing it in the theater was great. Like the theater experience, just sitting there on that Friday night, just watching some more Marvel content. I loved it. Yeah, I did really appreciate the 3rd act and how everything was set up and how everything was concluded. And then that brings me to the post-credit scenes. There are 2, and I actually ended up liking them. See, going into this, I was like, well, I don't give a shit about the Eternals, and the post-credit scenes are going to be related to the Eternals, but yeah, I'm not going to care. But I did. First of all, first post-credit scene, you have Patton Oswalt show up as Fifth the Troll, and Harry Styles as Thanos' brother. That's cool. That's just really cool. Everybody in my theater erupted about Harry Styles. I personally don't care about him. I was more happy about Patton Oswalt because they just canceled the MODOK season 2. Well, I guess that was never really going to happen, but they announced Jim Carrey as MODOK. And I do really like Patton Oswalt. He's my favorite comedian, and I thought he was actually pretty good in MODOK, and I'm glad he's actually joining the MCU. What's really interesting about this is that now Patton Oswalt has actually played 8 different Marvel characters. He's done Pip, which we just talked about, MODOK, which I just addressed. He was the scientist in Blade Trinity, and then he was 5 different Koenig brothers from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's crazy, man. I love his dedication to just like being a longtime comic book fan. I really appreciate that, and that's why he's one of my favorite comedians. I did really go on a tangent there, and that wasn't really relevant to the Eternals movie, but I thought it was worth mentioning, and that kind of heightened my excitement. And then second post-credit scene, Dane Whitman. We all kind of knew he was going to be Black Knight, and I figured that's kind of how they would set it up. But you hear a voice, and it's been confirmed to be Mahershala Ali's Blade. Hell yeah, man. I'm so excited for Mahershala Ali to be Blade. I think he's a great actor. I can't wait to see what new directions they go with that character. And I'm glad that they're actually like affirming his involvement in the new movies. I'm so excited for that. So just 2 great post-credit scenes. I did have some negatives. I think they're definitely worth addressing. Yeah, this is pretty much what everybody's talked about. The story is told in a non-linear way, where you have flashbacks right in the middle, like the first hour, and it doesn't work. There was no advantage to doing that, and it just means that it's hard to follow, and there's things that happen to characters that are very important to them before we've actually met those characters, which is basically the death of Ajax Salma Hayek. And because we haven't been introduced to her yet, and we don't know how the other characters feel about her, and they're very sad, it just doesn't work. And it really hurts that part of the movie, because they could have fixed that, but they chose to do it in this weird direction, and I didn't really appreciate it. Other than that, like, it wasn't a huge negative, but I think it's worth mentioning, and I can recognize that most of the critics' problems lied with the execution of the flashbacks. Other than that, though, the one character that I was not really a fan of was Sprite. And basically, I think there's some interesting things they do with her, like being a kid, and you can see her. She's very conflicted and cynical about that. But basically, in the 3rd act, she sides with Icarus for somewhat selfish reasons. She stabs Cersei, but then at the end, she gets like rewarded. which I just didn't really understand how that made sense or what the movie's explanation for that was. But other than that, great movie, huge Marvel level action and stakes with actual like well defined characters. I'm gonna go with like a high 7.5 out of 10 on this one, which I never expected this to be a movie that I enjoyed this much. Very controversial in its nature, and I don't care if people didn't like it. I completely understand where that was coming from. Honestly, I'm more annoyed that there's people who are saying that there's like the critics have an agenda against this movie, and there's like this whole conspiracy that everybody didn't watch the movie and was voting it down because of the diversity. That's really moronic, because it doesn't make sense. And I was more annoyed by that than people just not liking the movie for outlined reasons. But other than that, that was my review of the Eternals. More movie, TV reviews coming soon. The Hawkeye episodes will start in a couple weeks, so I'll start probably doing episode reviews for those. I don't know how everything's going to play out, but it's a series I'm very excited for and something I'd love to talk about more. So with that said, thank you so much for watching.